For months, I had poured everything into my job, into the company that had become more than a workplace. It was a battlefield, a puzzle, and in ways, my second home. I thought I was untouchable, that my loyalty and results had earned me respect. But nothing had prepared me for the day. I walked into the office and found a stranger at my desk, clicking through my emails like he owned the place. He had the same smug grin I hated, the kind that suggested he knew secrets he shouldn't. And then it hit me. They'd replaced me. Not just anyone, their nephew. I froze for a moment, gripping my coffee like it was a lifeline. I think there's been a mistake, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, his eyes mocking, as if my words were a joke. No mistake, he said smoothly. They said you were no longer needed. And just like that, years of work, of late nights and weekend sacrifices, evaporated in a single sentence. But I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. The hallway felt colder than ever as I gathered my belongings. Everyone avoided my gaze. My computer had been wiped clean, my projects archived under his name. Every file, every report, every client email, suddenly, he owned it. I could hear the echoes of my own footsteps bouncing off the walls, but what burned inside me was louder, a need to make them regret underestimating me. Later that night, sitting in my apartment, I stared at my laptop. There was a drive I'd hidden, a backup I had hoped I'd never need. My heart raced as I connected it. Files, contracts, communications, all untouched by him. A plan began to form, fragile yet dangerous. If he thought he could just take my place and slip into my life, he had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I returned. I wasn't going to confront him, at least not yet. I watched from the shadows, noting every habit, every routine. He was careless, overconfident, thinking that bloodline gave him immunity. But blood doesn't make skill, and that's where I had the advantage. Then something caught my eye. A folder on his desk, open and glowing under the fluorescent light. He hadn't noticed me, but he didn't know it contained files I hadn't even touched in years, files that could ruin more than just his reputation. I lingered, pretending to tie my shoes, listening to the quiet clicks of his mouse. The folder revealed everything. My old projects, hidden deals, client complaints. All the little secrets that I had kept safe, but that now, in his hands, could explode. I had one chance to turn the tables, but a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was it possible that he already suspected? My pulse quickened, and I realized I needed a plan, a precise strike. If I made a mistake now, everything would collapse. Then it happened. A message popped up on his screen. Something he hadn't deleted. Something marked confidential. I didn't need to see it. I already knew the consequences. My jaw tightened. He had stepped into my world without understanding its rules, and now for the first time, I felt the exhilarating rush of control slipping back into my hands. But the danger wasn't gone. They had replaced me. Yes, but they hadn't yet seen the storm that was about to descend. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't just take my job back. I would expose him, expose them, and watch the empire that cast me aside crumble. But first, I had to get closer, learn more, and wait for the perfect strike. My heart pounded as I left the office that day, a quiet smile curling across my lips. The game had begun, and neither he nor they would see it coming. The next morning, I walked in with a calm I didn't feel. Inside, the office hummed with the usual chatter, but every sound seemed amplified, every shadow a potential threat or opportunity. I noticed him immediately, sitting at my old desk, sprawled casually, tapping away on his keyboard as if he owned not just the office, but every success I had built. He glanced up once, smiled that same arrogant grin, then returned to his work. He had no idea I was already 3 moves ahead. I waited for the perfect moment, lingering by the water cooler, pretending to scroll through emails. Then I saw it. A folder left open on his desktop, blinking softly. My pulse quickened, and without hesitation, I slipped past a few cubicles, casually leaning over as if admiring a spreadsheet. And there it was, my old project files, my carefully archived contracts, the ones I had hidden when I anticipated someone trying to steal my place. He hadn't even realized they were there. For the first time since they fired me, a thrill of power surged through me. I clicked one file, just a peek. Names, numbers, confidential notes. Everything I had safeguarded was now within reach. And he had unknowingly handed it to me. My mind raced. If I exposed this properly, not only would he fall, but the ones who had promoted him would be implicated. I could feel the weight of vengeance settling over me like a second skin, warm and intoxicating. Then I heard the chair squeak behind me. My stomach tightened. He hadn't noticed me, but someone else had. I turned sharply. One of the senior managers, a quiet man who had always respected my work, was watching. His eyes flicked between me and the open files. A silent understanding passed between us. He knew I had a claim, even if the company didn't. That small, knowing nod gave me a sliver of confidence. I wasn't alone in this fight. I began piecing together a strategy. I couldn't just confront him head-on. That would be reckless. Instead, I needed subtlety. I needed to push him, to make him slip, to uncover every mistake, every lie he had used to claim my position. And I knew where to start. The files he hadn't even opened yet. The ones that contained his shortcuts, his unearned achievements, and most importantly, the contracts that could ruin him. Over the next few days, I observed him constantly. Every phone call, every client email, every interaction with the team was logged in my mind. I noticed inconsistencies, gaps in knowledge, little things that screamed incompetence. But the real prize came unexpectedly. One late evening, I returned to the office under the guise of forgetting my laptop charger. The place was empty, silent except for the soft hum of computers. And then I saw him. He was in the archive room, rifling through my old boxes. I crept closer, heart thundering, and watched as he pulled out papers, unaware that he was trespassing in my domain. His eyes lit up when he found what he thought was the final piece to cement his position. Old contracts, confidential deals, notes I had made years ago. But I had anticipated this. I had left certain files intentionally incomplete, baiting him, leading him into a trap. One wrong move, one leak, and the repercussions would be catastrophic. I stepped into the doorway. He spun around, startled. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, trying to mask the panic rising in his voice. "Just checking on things," I said softly, my voice calm but carrying an edge. He swallowed hard. He knew, just as I knew, that he had no real defense. I leaned in slightly, letting him feel the weight of my gaze. "You shouldn't touch things you don't understand," I said. His hands trembled over the papers, and in that moment, I realized how fragile his position truly was. I could take everything from him with a single move, expose him entirely, or let him continue his charade and watch him destroy himself from the inside. The temptation was intoxicating, but I waited. Patience was part of the plan. And then I saw it, an email open on the computer, a single message that could change everything if handled correctly. I didn't touch it, not yet. I retreated quietly, leaving him to fumble through my carefully planted traps. Outside, I breathed deeply, the night air sharp in my lungs. The pieces were falling into place, one by one. They had replaced me, yes, but they didn't. No, they had just handed me the power to undo everything they had built. The storm was coming, and they would feel it before they even realized it existed. And in that quiet night, I made a silent promise to myself. I would reclaim what was mine, but in a way that left no doubt, no mercy, no second chances. The perfect revenge was already in motion. The next morning, the office felt different, almost electric. I walked in with a casual stride, but every muscle was tense, every sense alert. He was already at my old desk, hunched over his laptop, smugly clicking through files that didn't belong to him. I could almost hear his thoughts. I own this place now. I'm untouchable. That arrogance was his first mistake, and mine was ready. I kept my distance, watching him interact with the team. He fumbled through presentations, misquoted data, and smiled too often at points that demanded seriousness. Each error was a tiny victory, a crack in the facade. But he didn't notice, and that was the danger. If he caught even a glimpse of my strategy, he could erase my advantage. I had to be invisible, patient, precise. By midday, I saw my opportunity. He had stepped away for a meeting, leaving his computer unlocked. Heart pounding, I approached, pretending to glance at an email on a colleague's screen. But my eyes were on his folder again, the one that held the files I had baited. Contracts, notes, confidential strategies, all untouched. I smiled quietly. The trap was set, and he was walking right into it. I copied a single file to a hidden drive, one that would appear innocuous if discovered, just enough to make it seem like he had access to critical information, but incomplete, fragmented, a puzzle he couldn't solve. I left everything exactly as it was and retreated, feeling a rush of adrenaline. He had no idea he was being manipulated, and that made it all the more satisfying. Hours later, I saw him return, visibly frustrated. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to make sense of the files. I pretended to pass by, a casual smile on my face, and noticed him muttering under his breath. Why isn't this making sense? Why is it wrong? That tiny moment of panic made my lips curl. I had created chaos without touching a single permanent file. Then the unthinkable happened. A client called, one that had previously been loyal to me. They needed clarification on a contract, my contract, and the nephew had no clue. He stumbled, stammered, trying to explain, but the client wasn't buying it. Emails flew back and forth, confusion mounting. My carefully planted fragments were working. They were exposing his inexperience, his carelessness. I slipped into a quiet corner, observing the chaos unfold. Every mistake he made, every misstep, fed the momentum I was building. But I had to act carefully. Too early, and the trap would collapse. Too late, and they might realize what I was doing. Timing was everything. And then I saw it, a folder on his desktop, one I hadn't noticed before. It was labeled with my name. My name. Curiosity flashed in me, but I stayed calm. I needed to know what he had discovered, if anything. Could he be onto me? My pulse quickened. I had hidden everything meticulously, yet the folder's presence suggested someone, him, or worse, someone above him, was starting to connect the dots. I couldn't risk exposure yet. I had to draw him out, let him make the first mistake. I watched as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning rapidly. Panic flickered across his face, then vanished, replaced with a smug confidence I had seen too many times. He thought he had found something that could help him. I knew better. Inside, I had planted a decoy. Just enough information to mislead him, confuse him, make him act impulsively. And act he did. By the end of the day, the first signs of real damage appeared. Clients questioned his authority. Team members started avoiding him. Emails meant to bolster his position had been redirected, altered, and twisted into traps. He was starting to unravel. And the best part, he didn't know why. Every move he made only dug him deeper into the pit I had prepared. That evening, as I left the office, I felt the first thrill of true control. They had replaced me, yes, but I had already begun taking back my power, step by step, file by file, and soon, very soon, the chaos would reach the top. My plan was working perfectly, and the storm I had promised myself was no longer just a fantasy. It was inevitable. But just as I was about to close the door, my phone buzzed. A single message. No name, no subject, just a line. Be careful. Not everything is as it seems. My blood ran cold. Someone knew or suspected. And that meant the game had just gotten much more dangerous. The message haunted me all night. Who had sent it? A colleague? Someone higher up? Or had they noticed my subtle manipulations? I couldn't afford to panic. If they were watching, I had to be more careful, more precise. The trap I had set for the nephew was still unfolding, but now an unseen variable threatened to ruin everything. The next morning, I entered the office as usual, pretending nothing had happened. He was already there, leaning back in my chair, with the same overconfident smirk. But there was a subtle change in him, a slight hesitation in the way he moved. I knew he had felt the sting of my manipulations. I could see it in his eyes, even if he refused to admit it. I started my routine, observing, noting, calculating. Each step he took, each email he sent, was being recorded in my mind. I realized that he was becoming predictable. His panic from yesterday had left traces, tiny flaws in his logic that I could exploit. But I also knew the warning I had received meant someone else was involved, that someone could ruin me if I misstepped. During lunch, I slipped into the archive room again. This time I wasn't alone. The nephew had left his access badge in a drawer. I took it and used it to access restricted files, hidden contracts, financial discrepancies, internal memos, all the information I had buried for years. And then I found it. An old internal audit report, flagged with red markers, a trail of errors someone had missed. If exposed, it could ruin the company, and him, completely. But just as I started copying the files, footsteps echoed behind me. I froze. He appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise, then narrowing into suspicion. "How did you—" he stammered. I smiled faintly, calm, collected. "Careful where you step," I said, holding the files close. "You might stumble into something you can't control." His confidence faltered. Just for a moment, but it was enough. By evening, the office was abuzz with rumors. Something was happening, but no one could explain it. Clients were questioning decisions he had made. Emails were vanishing, and he was floundering under pressure. I had never seen him like this. Helpless, unprepared, exposed. I knew the real moment of reckoning was coming. Then came the call. My phone buzzed again, the same cryptic tone. "Stop, or everything you've built will collapse." My hands trembled slightly. This was no longer a warning. It was a threat. Someone knew exactly what I was doing. I had to act, but now the stakes had doubled. Every move could either cement my revenge or destroy me entirely. I spent the night plotting. The nephew's mistakes were stacking up, and soon, they would lead him to make the ultimate blunder. But the question remained, who had sent the warning? I couldn't ignore it. And then I remembered something buried deep in one of the files. A single email chain, years old, between the executives and the nephew's family. Something hidden. Something that, if revealed, could shift the balance entirely. The next morning, I executed the first part of the plan. I leaked a fragment of information, not enough to expose me, but enough to push him further into chaos. He panicked. He made a rash decision, signing a document without reviewing it, sending it to a client who immediately flagged discrepancies. The fallout was immediate. His credibility collapsed in hours, and the senior team began to question his position. I watched from a distance, heart pounding. The storm was building exactly as I had planned. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me too. Someone who could undo everything at any moment. And then it happened. A notification popped up on my laptop. "We're closer than you think. One more step, and it all ends." My breath caught. Someone was closing in, and I had no idea who. My plan had to accelerate, but one wrong move now could expose me. The danger wasn't just him anymore. It was bigger. And that's when I realized the true game had only just begun. The morning was cold, sharp, and charged with a tension that made the air feel heavy. I arrived early, as always. But today, I wasn't just observing, I was hunting. Every detail mattered. The way he walked into the office, the way his fingers hovered over the keyboard, the subtle tremor in his hand when he realized yesterday's chaos wasn't going away. I had never seen him so vulnerable. I made my way past the cubicles, blending in, unnoticed. He didn't see me approach. He never did. His focus was entirely on repairing the damage he didn't understand. He had created himself. Emails flew back and forth like sparks from a fire he couldn't control. Clients called in confusion, demanding explanations, and he stumbled, floundering, grasping for authority he had never truly earned. That's when I saw it, the folder on his desk that changed everything. It wasn't mine. Not really. Someone else had accessed it. Someone who had left breadcrumbs leading straight to a secret I hadn't anticipated. His family wasn't just a mere connection, they had influence, power and protection embedded deep within the company. Suddenly, the game was bigger than I thought. I leaned against a cubicle wall, pretending to read an email on my phone, but my mind raced. If this information leaked the wrong way, it could jeopardize everything. Yet if I handled it carefully, it could become the final piece to destroy him completely. I had underestimated his support network. The warning I received last night made sense now. It wasn't just paranoia. Someone high up was watching me, tracking every move. He returned from a meeting, visibly shaken but trying to maintain composure. His eyes darted to the folder, then to me, as if sensing my presence. I smiled faintly. He had no idea how much I already knew. The subtle power shift in the room was intoxicating. The chaos was my ally. And yet the invisible eyes watching made the stakes deadly. During lunch, I made my move. I accessed the hidden files I had previously planted, carefully piecing together a timeline of his errors. Each document, each fragment, exposed inconsistencies in his decisions and actions. The puzzle began to form, a picture of incompetence that only I could fully reveal. But there was something new, something dangerous, an email thread showing that someone within the senior team had been feeding him selective information to protect him, to shield him from the consequences I had orchestrated. That discovery chilled me. I realized I wasn't just facing him, I was facing the entire shadow of protection around him. Yet that only sharpened my resolve. I needed a new plan, one bold enough to break through the barrier his family and allies had built, and I had it. A single move executed perfectly could unravel everything. Late that afternoon, I slipped into the conference room under the guise of printing documents. The nephew had left the door unlocked. I placed a fragment of evidence in a shared folder, marked with subtle hints only a few in the company could understand. It was designed to appear as though the information had been overlooked for months, implicating him in errors he hadn't fully comprehended. I withdrew silently, heart racing. This was no longer just revenge. It was a carefully engineered collapse. But as I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was sharper, colder. Stop now, or everything ends. Not just for him, for you too. The blood drained from my face. Whoever was watching had stepped closer. My plan was no longer just a game of strategy. It was now a high-wire act, where a single misstep could destroy me, and I realized something terrifying. The next move would determine who survived this war. Me, him, or someone else entirely. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the chill of the warning settle. The storm was approaching, and I was standing in its path. But I had spent too long being careful. I couldn't stop, not now. The first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and soon, the walls of his carefully built facade would crumble completely. And then, just as I stepped back into the empty office, I heard it, the soft click of a camera shutter from above, hidden somewhere in the ceiling. Someone had been watching every step I took, every move, and that meant the true game, the real danger, had only just begun. The office was eerily quiet, the usual hum of computers muted as if the building itself was holding its breath. I knew the time had come. The pieces were in place, the nephew's mistakes, the planted evidence, the subtle leaks. But now I needed the final push. One calculated move could topple him completely. I approached his desk with measured steps, pretending to check a file on my tablet. He glanced up, eyes narrowing, sensing something. I let a small smile curl across my lips. Confidence is contagious, and now, fear would be. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. "I think you need a second opinion," I said softly, sliding a file across his desk. His hands froze. The file contained errors he had made weeks ago, mistakes no one else had noticed, and yet it was enough to create suspicion, enough to make the senior team question him. He opened it, scanning quickly, panic flashing across his face. I don't understand," he stammered. The cracks in his armor were finally showing. I leaned slightly closer, letting him feel my presence. "Maybe you need help handling things that aren't yours," I murmured. He swallowed hard, realizing the trap I had set. Every misstep he had made, every overconfidence-fueled decision, was now under scrutiny, and all of it traced back to him. No excuses, no shelter. The emails I had strategically altered began circulating subtly, pointing blame toward him. Clients called with questions. The team whispered in corridors, and he was forced to respond with nothing but shaky explanations. His world was unraveling, thread by thread, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then came the final shock. An internal memo, supposedly confidential, slipped into the shared inboxes of the executive board. It implicated him in decisions that were technically under my authority months ago. His name was all over it, yet he had no recollection of signing or approving anything. Confusion turned to panic. I watched from the corner of the office as the weight of exposure pressed down on him, and the first real crack in his composure appeared. He turned to me, eyes wide, realizing too late that I had orchestrated every moment. How did you?" he whispered, fear lacing every syllable. I didn't answer. There was no need. His collapse was my statement. My revenge, long simmering, was finally erupting. But before I could savor it, my phone buzzed again. A message that made my blood run cold. "You're in deeper than you realize. Pull back, or no one survives." Someone was watching, controlling more than I had anticipated. The game had grown far bigger, far more dangerous, and now, my every move carried a risk I hadn't counted on. I clenched my fists, adrenaline surging. The storm I had unleashed on him was only the beginning. If I wanted to finish this, I had to outsmart not just him, but the unseen forces that had been monitoring my every step. The next move would determine who walked away, and who would fall completely. The office lights flickered as if warning me. My heart raced. I had begun the reckoning, but the real test, the true climax of my revenge, was waiting just around the corner. The air in the office seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the verdict that would decide everything. I walked in like someone who belonged there, calm, composed, the mask of a person untouched by chaos. But inside, my blood was a river of molten plains. The nephew's world had started to crumble, and the unseen hand that had been watching me was tightening the screws. I had one last perfect move left. If it landed true, it would strip every protection from him, and dragged the architects who replaced me into the light. I moved silently through the building, fingertips trailing the familiar grooves of desks I had once polished with late-night coffee and whispered negotiations. Memories flickered. The client who trusted me. The whispered thanks from teammates. The nights I stayed to fix problems no one noticed. Those memories were fuel. I wasn't doing this for spite alone. I was reclaiming a life someone had stolen. The file I carried on my thumb drive felt heavier than its weight. A compilation of everything. The audit report. The selective memos protecting his family. The altered signatures. The breadcrumb email chains that traced back to boardroom hands. I set the trap where they expected least. The monthly all-hands. It was a theater of power, where whispers traveled fast and reputations were either forged or shredded under fluorescent light. I'd arranged for the memo to appear in the projected slide deck as a routine update, innocuous, public, unavoidable. When the projector clicked on and the board members scanned the room, their faces would betray the first real flicker of alarm. I had rehearsed the timing in my head 1,000 times. Breathe. Walk in. Let the room see. When the slide changed and the memo unfurled across the screen, a silence fell so complete it felt like a physical thing. Eyes darted, lips tightened. The nephew's smile vanished, replaced by a ghost of recognition and panic. And then the room erupted into questions. Where did this come from? Who authorized these approvals? I sat perfectly still as fingers pointed, as accusations swirled and as the board began to parse the evidence. The memo traced decisions to signatures that didn't exist. Approvals logged while he was in meetings that had never occurred. It was a lattice of fabricated competence, and now every strand was burning. He tried to speak, to form a defense, but the words stumbled and fell. The board's eyes were knives. I watched him unravel, the public fall, the private collapse, and felt the sick relief of a justice finally served. But as his allies looked around the room for someone to blame, their gazes landed on something else. Not just him, but the pattern of protection that had allowed him to climb. Heads turned toward the people who'd quietly nudged him forward. The same people who had replaced me with a nephew. Recognition spread through the room like a stain. That was when the ceiling camera clicked again. A tiny mechanical whisper that carried a new threat. Someone from the protected circle. Someone who hadn't wanted the boardroom. Cleaned. Moved quickly. Pulling a private string. My phone buzzed with a final ultimatum. One last, cold line that promised more than danger. End this now, or the fallout will consume more than careers. My pulse thudded in my throat. The room was collapsing, but not in the tidy way I'd imagined. Collateral burned, and the stakes were no longer neat or contained. I had a choice. Stop and let the board handle their own rot, or deliver the last piece that would force a true reckoning. I chose the reckoning. I rose, walked to the podium with the steady steps of someone who had rehearsed, courage like a muscle, and addressed the room. I spoke quietly, the words clipped, stripped of theatrical venom. I told the simple truth. The audit findings, the email threads, the chain of edits that placed blame and then erased it. I laid out the timeline, the motives, the people who'd shielded him. As names were read, a hush fell on the room like a verdict. Faces whitened. Fingers went slack. The nephew's eyes met mine for the shortest, fiercest second, and in that flash, I saw a child who'd been given armor he didn't earn and had no idea how to wield. But the real thing I saw was the fear in the eyes of those who had chosen blood over merit. Their protection was brittle now. It cracked, and the truth poured through like light through a broken pane. They called for an immediate investigation. They asked for explanations, for resignations, for phone records. The nephew was escorted out, not with dignity, but with the terrified silence of someone who knew parents and patrons could no longer shield him. Around me, colleagues I'd thought indifferent approached with tentative apologies, their voices trembling. I felt nothing like triumph. I felt the exhausted, hollow of someone who had spent too long watching the clock tick toward justice. That night, walking home under a sky that felt too sharp for sleep, the final message arrived. No threats now, only a single sentence, almost courteous. You survived the first storm. The next one's for everyone. Let out a breath that could have been a laugh or a sob. The war had changed me. It had woken me to the fact that power had roots deeper than a single desk or a single nepotistic hire. My victory was real, but it was also a new beginning, one where I'd have to decide how far I was willing to go. I sat at my kitchen table, the thumb drive warm under my palm. The office would rebuild, people would pick sides, and some would try to rearrange the mess into a familiar picture. I could have taken my old desk, my old title, and walked back into a life of cautious compromise. Instead, I did the thing that felt truest. I erased the final fragment of compromise from my system. I deleted the copies that could be used to barter, to blackmail, to buy silence. If justice was to be clean, it had to be without my fingerprints left to stain it. I published everything publicly the next morning, not for revenge, but to stop the cycle. I sent the audit, the emails, the names, to regulators, to the press, to the clients who deserved the truth. The fallout was immediate and ugly. Lawsuits blossomed like rust. Board members resigned in hurried bursts. The company's PR machine sputtered and failed. The nephew's family scrambled to distance themselves, and some who had once smiled warmly at me now avoided my gaze like it could burn them. In the aftermath, when the dust settled into a new, harsher clarity, I found my office waiting. Not the same one. Not wrapped in the quiet loyalties of old, but emptied of the soft protections that had allowed rot to grow. My chair felt foreign, but my hands remembered how to make decisions. That didn't require looking over my shoulder. I reclaimed my place not to rule, but to rebuild. A few months later, the headlines carried the verdicts. People who'd hidden behind names and bloodlines were held to account. Clients received apologies and restitution. The company that had once been a comfortable cage became a cautionary tale. It wasn't perfect justice, nothing ever is, but it was better than silence. And as I stood one evening by the window of my new office, watching city lights shiver, I thought about what I'd learned. Power protected by family is fragile. Loyalty bought with convenience is brittle. I had taken back what was mine, but I had also burned bridges, changed lives and created new enemies. That knowledge sat with me like a permanent scar and a talisman. This is Karma Unfolded, where every secret finds its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.